Thanks everyone for tuning in to check out our podcast today, Maker Connect. My name is Matt Despins and I'll be your host for the show. With me today, we have Annie Hoffman, who's one of our expert negotiation trainers here at the firm. Also with us today, we have Eliza Foltz. Eliza is currently the Chief Revenue Officer at Preda and no doubt has some very interesting stories and perspectives to share. Eliza, if you're open to it, I'd love to start by asking you to tell us just a little bit about your career and your background so the listeners can get just a flavor of your negotiation experience and when you realized how important negotiations were. So, Eliza, we're truly excited to have you here with us today. And with that, I'll turn it over to you to brag about yourself for a minute. It's the host who's making a specific request that you brag. So your humility will remain fully intact. So go ahead, Eliza.
Thank you. And thank you for having me today. I really am glad to be here. So my background, I grew up in Massachusetts. I was a 3-sport varsity athlete, was really, really good at school. So even though I showed early signs of some kind of troubling behavioral health concerns and addiction early on, I ended up being pretty successful anyway, because I was a hard worker and I had some degree of emotional intelligence, so I could operate in team environments and kind of fly under the radar. And so I was a great athlete, played ice hockey at Brown University, and also on the US team. Got injured and was prescribed OxyContin, which we all know how that story ends. But I had periods where I ended up really holding it together and being successful. So one of the bright spots is I worked with MIT's Media Lab to develop wearables to help people with autism and developmental disabilities better understand their biometrics. And also people in that population will tend to have really flat affect. So it looks like these really aggressive episodes or self-injurious behavior comes out of nowhere, when in reality, it's highly predictable.
Sure.
So all we need to do is signal to the caregiver that the individual is beginning to have trouble and they can de-escalate to keep everyone safe. I thought I was going to save the world, went on to get accepted into a PhD program for clinical psychology. And that's when things really began to backslide with addiction. So I was in and out of treatment for the next, 15 years. But during other periods, I ran sales at a SaaS-based startup called PromoBox. It was a marketing platform. And I then was one of the most successful salespeople ever at Tory Burch, which sort of an interesting aside, again, gives you an idea of, I wouldn't say those are an intense negotiations, but certainly being able to work in a team and just as with negotiations, being able to present ways in products in a way that's going to make sense to the consumer, because everyone has different motivations for buying, and figuring out what those motivations are, just like at Tory Burch, just like at PromoBox. It's all important, just like at Preda, figuring out what the underlying fear is, what's the pain point, and being able to position appropriately. Ironically, even though addiction almost cost me my life, it was one of the most amazing things that's given me the best gift of all, and that's my current position. So while I had years and years of sales experience, I springboarded further than I probably would have otherwise had I not had the background that I had and all those years of struggle, being able to really understand the treatment landscape and be able to position Preda for a really, really strong go-to-market with treatment centers and understand not only what treatment centers need, but what clients need as well. And that's where we are today.
So, I mean, what a fascinating story. And, as we talked about before the podcast got started, Eliza and I share some commonality in the background of me, me working in mental health and law enforcement. And that's kind of what she's doing now. And we even have a mutual friend who's in that area. But so with that, with that background of intensity, a lot of emotion all the time, all the things that come with addiction, as an addict, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, you're constantly, when you're in the addiction phase, you're constantly working to have your needs met against society and professionals that don't want you to get those needs met. Is that a fair statement?
From the perspective of somebody in active addiction, you're absolutely correct. Being your number one priority on a given day is figuring out how to get your needs met. And they are needs that are very difficult to meet. There is never enough money. There's never enough drugs. It's always more, more, more. And being able to, I mean, in a way, it's a really sick thing, but it's almost a negotiation of sorts there.
You took it right out of my mouth. That's right.
Too, but
You're stealing my thunder, Eliza. That's where I was going with it. And so, right. I mean, in a way, some of your negotiation experience that you bring into these sales roles come from that, in the sense of, you approach it with a really keen eye, right? You're looking at a lot of details to try to understand where your maybe tactical advantages can be. What are the motivations of somebody? What it is that they, what's valuable to them? Is it fair to say that some of those skills you might have learned from your past?
I mean, absolutely. Also, not being afraid of rejection. That's a critical one. You need to be able to ask for what you need. And I think that's one of the major things that salespeople, not even just in negotiation, but salespeople really struggle with. Asking for the business. You're not going to get it if nobody asks. But people are afraid of rejection. They're afraid of what happens, or they're so set in one way of thinking because they've been trained that way that they can't pivot. They can't be nimble and agile and able to think on their feet. There's the life of somebody in active addiction is frenetic and chaotic, and it is always changing, and being able to adapt and figure out in the moment what's going to be the most successful tactic. And if that's not if it's not successful, being able to switch and try something new, certainly has served me well. And I also think, you mentioned a keen eye. That is really interesting. So not only looking at what people are saying, but what's their body language saying? What's their tone saying? What are their pauses saying? All of that. And being able to be a really acute observer of kind of the human condition, and how are all these things marrying up to where how you can better understand their position and position yourself to be successful.
Yeah, because Annie, I want to flip that to you for a minute, because a lot of, when you're out there training and you're talking to these clients, the clients have a need to understand all of these cues and subtleties and obvious signs, because they have things that valuable to them that they need. From the perspective of Eliza, she's paying such close attention in those active addiction phases because her life might depend on it, right? Her ability to get what she needs could depend on it, that hyper awareness. So when you take some of those concepts into working with a client, how do you apply those? When a client asks you about body language or tone, what are some of your general thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think Eliza hit the nail right on the head, because it's stuff that we talk about on when it relates to negotiation. We take a look at nonverbal cues, right? What is that person doing? What makes them uncomfortable? Are they showing signs of being uncomfortable? Are they showing signs of true confidence? So nonverbal cues, 100%. The way people speak is another one. There are verbal cues to indicate maybe some stressful moments. And then there's also the pauses, those hesitations that Eliza talked about. These are all things we need to be aware of when we negotiate with the other party. And really, Eliza touched on something that struck a chord with me. And that is, as we think about negotiation in active addiction, right? It's what do I need, right? But also really being able to understand that fear of rejection and being okay with it. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes people will negotiate with themselves before they even negotiate with an external party, right? They'll take a look at that negotiation, say, well, the other person's smarter, better, more tenured, whatever it is, and immediately will go into that negotiation with almost underserving or sub-optimizing our thought process before even going in. So Eliza, you mentioned it. I know I said it a different way, but it's almost like negotiating with yourself first before we can then go negotiate for our needs.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine too, and again, we're talking a little bit about this addiction part because, that's Eliza's world that she's working in now in her past. And I have that background, but it's interesting. I never thought about it until Eliza just came on the show, which is I do see a lot of similarities there, right? Like in the sense of like really honing in and focusing and having to hyper evaluate what the other party values, right? Like what is this doctor going to value the most in order to get me this prescription that I need, right? Like how, so I'm processing this well, but I think it's kind of a fascinating topic. So related to, you touched on this a little bit, Eliza, related to fear, right? Fear and negotiations. I will even combine those. Fear and people not wanting to be uncomfortable when they head into a negotiation. Where do you think some of that comes from the corporate standpoint, digging into a bit of your corporate experience? Like, what do you think's happening inside of somebody when they want X, the other person wants Y, and they're headed in to negotiate for that? What do you think is making them fearful and also so not okay with being uncomfortable? Where do you think that stems from?
I think there's a lot to unpack in what you said. I think that
By design.
When we look at, yeah, thank you for the softball, but I could pull any one of those.
Yeah.
So one of the things I think of is we tend to view the world as binary. That especially when in hard moments, stressful moments, fear, anger, we resort to this or that. Is it black or white? Is it me or you? And we miss a lot of the nuance that sometimes my needs, even though they may look disparate from your needs, there may be some overlap there. And I think we have all this emotion that comes in about, I have a quota I need to meet, or I'm new and I need to prove myself, or I'm the top salesperson. Everyone's expecting me to sell more than everybody else, and I haven't closed a deal in 3 days or 3 weeks or whatever the sales cycle tends to be. So we project all of these emotions and make things overly complicated. And I mean, unfortunately, that's the human condition because we are a species that has all of these cognitive capabilities and they tend to work against us, as Annie mentioned.
Damn human emotions.
We negotiate against ourselves internally. And then we get nervous in those moments. And I know because I tend to do this sometimes. I am chatty, you can tell. And I take those pauses and I have trouble sitting in those pauses. And sometimes I'll say something just to alleviate that quiet. But there's so much that can be discerned from that quiet, from that pause. What are they doing? Are they thinking? Is there something I could learn? Is there an opportunity to step back and think, can I ask a good question? And that's one of the ways that I think fear really works against us. I also believe that if it's channeled right and you have a skilled supervisor, manager, or boss, I think that fear can also be used as a big motivator in an appropriate way. I don't mean scare people into selling. Like that never works, will never work. In the history of every industry, it just doesn't work. But what are they afraid of? And how can we spin that into what their goals are? And how can we motivate people and give people the skills and the confidence to help give them the tools to overcome those things in the moment? Fear can be based around, for me, and this was a lot of part of addiction, was based on needing to be the best, needing to be the best player on the ice, needing to sell the most, needing to fit into my family's idea of all of these things. And in a way that's worked against me in the past, but now I view this as well, where can I go to for advice? I can go to my family. Who can I look at in difficult moments? Athletes tend to be skill driven people. Well, what are they doing? How do I channel these fears into routes that can actually make me better?
Yeah. Annie, as a former D1 athlete yourself, I mean, is some of this resonating with you? I mean, are you aligning with some of that?
Oh, 100%. I mean, 100%. I'm very competitive, very driven. And just like Eliza mentioned is, you know, sometimes that fear of failure can work against us, right? Sometimes that fear of being uncomfortable can work against us. But if we can find a way to flip that fear into recognizing that being uncomfortable is okay and becoming more comfortable being uncomfortable. I saw a quote, and I should have wrote down who said it, but I saw a quote the other day, and it said, if you're not uncomfortable, you're not growing. Right? So there are going to be things that take us outside of our comfort zone in life. And, you know, how do we embrace those scenarios? Do we channel it and say, okay, I realize I'm uncomfortable in this particular moment. I realize that I might be chatty like Eliza in these moments, but hey, let me try something different and listen. Maybe I can pick up on some of these other things, right? So that self-awareness and that ability to remain non-emotive when needed in those very uncomfortable scenarios can really help us, right? But some people will just avoid it altogether because it's fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of, you know, not fitting into the mold that our parents or that society has created for us. So I'm 100% in lockstep with Eliza here on just all of these things, whether it's business, whether it's own personal journeys. It can all be related to how do we embrace these things.
One of my favorite quotes is, I forget who said it. It looks like we have two quotes to look up, Annie, one for me, one for you. Yep. But it says, you know, I've suffered a great many tragedies in my life, most of which have never actually happened. Right. So we all presuming the worst and going into a negotiation and like, it's so uncomfortable and everything's so bad and negative. And like, yeah, there are some things that do end up sucking as bad as we thought they were going to, but 9 times out of 10, it's like, it's okay. You know what I mean? Like it's all right. It's going to be okay. So I think getting comfortable with that discomfort is a key to both from the sales and the negotiation perspective. Eliza, you know, talking about negotiations as both an art and a science, there's a lot of schools of thought out there in terms of what percentage of which is more prominent in a negotiation. Some think it's equal. What do you feel about that? Like, think about even like from a perspective of a science, we can talk even like about, dare I say it, AI. So I want to hear your thoughts on negotiations as both an art and a science.
Yeah, so I think they're both critical. I mean, that's the obvious safe answer, right? So let me expand on that. From an art standpoint, I mean, the art part is so critical because you can be the best trained person in the world, and if you are missing, as we talked about, those pauses, that body language, like there is an art to understanding people's tone. There's an art to understanding people's body language. I also think there's an art and a skill set to putting aside your own feelings and your fear of rejection and not taking things personally. Like that is an art form. And to understanding that just because somebody says now, not now, doesn't mean not ever. And then how can you leverage the no into the yes? That is all art. So I do tend to skew more on the art side of things. I think anybody can be I think anybody with the correct emotional makeup and hunger and drive, and if there's an innate emotional intelligence, can be trained into a good salesperson, but I don't think you can train the art form. So like, while the science you can teach and you know, you can give statistics, and this is the right amount of time to wait before reaching out. This is what a scaled email looks like. This is how you can bullet things to make them more digestible. This is how you can book meetings more effectively. And that is critical, looking at the sales funnel and where are people falling off? Why are they falling off? Where can that be optimized? But all of it's for naught if your people don't have the innate art and the innate ability to pivot and to not get tied into things. That's my view. Annie, you may have a different view than I do. I would weigh the art 75 and the science 25. person.
Annie, go ahead and take it away on that too. And I will say that after you're done, I am going to tie this in, if you don't know where I'm going with this yet, to the guest that we had last week, because talking about the comparisons between, sales and negotiation communication and what our guest last week, but go ahead and talk about art negotiation.
All right, here's my thought process on it. And I'm going to use some sports analogies just because, Eliza, you played hockey. I played soccer, so
okay. Thank you for answering that. It's been bugging me since 30 seconds.
All right, sorry about that. So I think we can look at negotiation as it relates to doing our respective sports. And I don't believe that any one person is born with this innate ability to negotiate. However, it is a learned practice. Similar to your ice hockey days, is if you never practiced, if you never prepared, you probably wouldn't be on, did I hear you right, the Olympic team?
So I got injured before the Olympic team. I was on the US team. I went to Olympic Training Center every year, all that.
And she said it so casually too. NBD. Yeah. I was just somehow involved in the Olympics. No big deal.
Yeah. So
all good.
So let me apologize. Sorry, the US team. I mean, pretty incredible feat. And that didn't happen by accident. It happened by all the time you spent on the ice, all of the staying after practices and just doing all of the things to get better. From a negotiation standpoint, we're talking differently negotiation versus sales to some regard. However, I am a true believer that with negotiation, it's like practicing. You can't just get on the ice and assume you're going to be one of the top players in the United States by accident, right? You have to do the work to get there. And when it comes to negotiation and when it comes to speaking with the clients that we deal with is the power of preparation, right? Preparation is so key because we can almost forecast before we even sit down in that negotiation. What are our other options? And as you spoke about with sales is how do we pivot? And it's forecasting that pivot if we need to. So that's I guess my take on it with a few sports analogies out there.
I love it. I love it. So where I was going with that other part, Eliza, is last week we had a guest on who is arguably a top 5, maybe top 10 LinkedIn influencer in all the United States, Sam McKenna, Sam Sales. And she used to work for LinkedIn corporate. In any event, Sam introduced she brought up a very interesting topic. Now, she said it as related to sales, and she's well qualified to talk about sales, one of the top in the country. But she also, I want to bring this about negotiations, which is talking about the way that we communicate with the other party. Sam linked it to like a date. Like if you wouldn't do it in real life on a date, you wouldn't start off very bold or whatnot. That if you wouldn't do it in a scenario where you were expected to be comfortable, you shouldn't do it in a professional communication. How do you feel about that? And to ask the question a little bit differently, maybe to clarify a bit, like in the world of negotiations, do you think there's value in communicating with the other party in a comfortable and collaborative way versus maybe like a really sterile or confrontational one? Does that make sense?
Sort of. I mean, I would never advocate anybody to do things that are sterile or confrontative, but
sure.
But I think I understand your question enough, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, but what I think I heard is that if you wouldn't do it on a date, you probably shouldn't do it in a negotiation, right? Is that correct?
Something along those lines, correct. Yeah. Yep.
Fine. Okay.
Yep.
So I think that's true. I think part of, and not to bring up recovery again, but part of what recovery has taught me is that life doesn't really operate in black and whites. So I almost never say never. I think that if there's a really good reason to do something that is out of the ordinary or shocking or like leading with humor or bringing up, somewhere that I generally would never suggest to a client, oh, like this is like a deficit in your program. Like that is a losing strategy. But there may be occasions to point out, like, this is an area where, like, we can really improve. This is what it looks like you're doing. And leading that way, if somebody is not responding and it's that type of person and you think that that might be okay, or this is how another program, like, again, generally not good to compare programs with other programs, but this program seems very similar to yours in these ways. This is something they're doing to really be an industry leader. Let's help you do that too. Again, you would never start a date and be like, there's this other guy that asked me out and he's great. And you just never would do that. But I think if there's a really good reason to do it, or you've been really unsuccessful in every other regard, and it's a last resort, maybe, but you have to have a darn good reason to do that. And be willing to bank on it.
Yeah, I mean, similar to this podcast so far, we had a really good time with Sam too. The same thing you had, this fun, casual energy, all good for the podcast where we tend to be more, sterile and focused on kind of like numerical topics. But these are a lot of fun too. I really enjoy it. So, speaking about emotions in the negotiation process, I feel like sometimes, maybe often, ego can play a big part in negotiations. Ego in the sense of either needing to win or there is no winning, hint, but, needing to get something, maybe not because it has any particular value to you, but because of an insecurity or an ego. What do you think about that? Like when you dive into your own negotiations or people that you've watched, do you see ego sometimes be an attribute, or do you typically see it be a detriment?
That's a great question. In my field, and I'm highly competitive, love to close, love to win.
We don't see that yet, just so you know. It's not coming through at all.
So for me, for me, actually, none of that matters when it comes to Prada, because it's such a deeply personal mission for me. I think ego can be superseded a little bit if you are part of a company where you truly believe in the mission and you feel like you're doing some good. And I think that speaks to clients. I think people generally are smarter than I think we give people credit for sometimes, and they are good at sniffing out bullshit. They are good at understanding people's motivations as much as we think that, oh, like I'm so crafty or I've been presented that way. Like people are smart. We do negotiations from the age of like 3 on. Like my kid did negotiations about what color socks she wants to wear this morning. So like we get good at this. We are trained and we operate in communities. I'm not saying that my kid is like a skilled negotiator. She's not. And she does need some work in that regard. Annie, maybe I'll send her to you.
I say, yeah, have her meet with Annie for 10 minutes.
But I think that, in my role, ego is largely taken out of it because I truly feel like we're saving lives and what we do really matters. So whether, if there's a program that doesn't work with me, I don't take it personally. And I trust that they know what they're doing right now. And that again, not now is doesn't never need to be a not never. That said, I think if people are not in as mission oriented of a company, or they don't feel as connected, or it's just not that type of product, in which case is like, that's fine too. I think ego works against us because we tend to attribute personal meaning to why people are saying no. We tend to take things personally. It was something I did, or there's maybe some way that I could have steered a different outcome. There's some ways that like there's nothing that could have been done differently. I mean, if somebody just got locked into a 3-year contract, you're probably not getting them out of that contract like in the next month. Wait, bide your time, be there, approach it in 6 months. Maybe there's opportunity. But generally, I think we attribute meaning and emotion to things that it's just not appropriate. It's not necessary.
Yeah, we it's funny. I've talked about that before. It's like whether it's sales or in personal life, and you try to get in touch with somebody, or they don't get back to you, or they don't hire you or whatever, right? We're so awesome. It's always about us, right? The reason the person isn't getting back is because they're sitting there all day strategizing on how to avoid my call, right? Because they have nothing else going on. The
Right.
reality of it is, to your point, it's not about you 99% of the time, right? It's not about you. They have 55 million other things going on. You're just not that important, which is okay, right? You're lower on the priority scale. So Annie, when you're talking with teams about ego and stuff, where does that factor into the maker group's training? What generally do we talk about around that topic?
Yeah, ultimately is, and Eliza brought up just her passion with Prita. So it's a little bit different. I'm going to change my response a bit. She's 100% right. Is when we don't have that deep embedded passion with the product or service that we're dealing with. Listen, at the end of the day, it's commercial negotiation. Leave your ego at the door, right? Ego can get in the way. Your competitive spirit can get in the way to get a deal done. And again, at the end of the day, in commercial negotiations, we don't have that deep rooted passion. Well, let me go
it's
back.
It's not so personal.
Yes, it's not as personal, right? That company is paying you to protect the pockets of that company, right? And you know what? We're gonna have some wins, we're gonna have some losses, but at the end of the day, should we take it personally? No, because whether it's you or someone else having that negotiation, similar outcome. When you go into personal life, and clearly Prita is very, very close, near and dear to Eliza's heart, it changes things, right? That is her business, but that is also her personal passion.
Yep.
So it's a fine balance there, right?
Yeah. It's Annie, you said it really well, that like, yeah, thinking about it from the standpoint of removing some of that emotion and ego, because you're responsible, and life bears responsibility, right? You're responsible to protect the pockets of the company, but that's what you're hired to do. And so it is your responsibility to do that. And you do need to maximize your position there, but try to not make it personal, right? Because at the end of the day, it's not about you. Versus a scenario that Eliza's talking about, whereas there's much more of a humanity component to it, right? Where there's a lot more humanity at stake, not just dollars and cents. Is that right, Eliza?
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like we can save so many lives. And so I know I said, oh, like egos. So unfortunately, I get sad when things don't close as quickly, or there's other competing interests, and this is where I mean, I shouldn't. I get sad, not from an ego standpoint. I get sad because I just think of how many like lives we could be directly impacting and keeping people in recovery. And I think that as we continue to grow, that we're just going to be everywhere. And that's really exciting too. So that's also what feeds me. The same thing that can be really hard is also the same thing that feeds me and drives me and keeps me passionate.
It's amazing how, some of those addictive tendencies for all of us, myself included, can end up being very productive, right? Like if we wrap ourselves around something that's healthy and productive, then we can really do some damage in a positive way.
That's right. I mean, I'm really hopeful that there's a reason that I'm here. Still, I mean, I survived 3 overdoses in 36 hours. And that statistically, that's highly unusual. And so my hope is that we can really make a difference and bring Prita to a lot of people, and also give a lot of families a lot of peace, because there's a family community component to it as well.
Yeah, it's amazing. And before I get to the next and one of the last questions, I will say that, there's a common misperception out there. I think it's gone away a lot in the last 10 years, but about people who have addictions. And I've told people for a long time, when I was a police officer for 10 years, some of my favorite people I ever interacted with were the people who had an addiction, after they woke up, and Narcan and all that stuff. But like when we were at the hospital just hanging out, like these are some of the coolest people in the world. So the answer is that, like, when you mentioned 3 times in 36 hours, I had one person that I Narcan 5 times in 24 hours at 5 different stores. Yeah. All over the city. And so, yeah, same person 5 times, 24 hours. My whole shift was like basically him. But but my point of it is that I think that those kinds of life experiences add a lot of substance to who we are and how we go into negotiations. Really gives you some ability to think about what things are like for the other party, right, Annie? And that's a big part of it, trying to think about what the other party might value. And I think if you have a lot of truly impactful life experiences, you're better to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And people are willing to talk about themselves. So if you're not sure, just ask. Like if you're not sure what they value, just ask. Like they'll tell you. And maybe, there's more subtle ways to go about it. And if you still can't get the right answer, then be direct. Or, I'm having a hard time understanding what's important to you. Can you tell me some of the things that you value or what keeps you up at night? That's one that I use a good amount. Like if you could solve one problem, what would it be? What keeps you up at night? And people are willing to talk and be transparent, especially if it's roles where people are passionate or they've been at the company a long time. Clearly there's some affiliation there and affinity. People are willing to help out and shed some insight.
And Annie talks a lot about that too, in the past, about the ability to ask those questions, like what's important to you. Having transparency in that negotiation relationship has to do with laying the foundations of trust from the beginning, right? And I think I've heard you say before that negotiation begins with the first phone call.
Yeah, 100%. So, every point of contact in commercial negotiation is part of the negotiation. But at the same time, we all have our own stresses and pressures and key performance indicators that our bosses are taking a look at, and we're bonused on that. But at the end of the day, in a negotiation, if we can't understand what's important to the other party and asking them, hey, what do you value here? Let me make you look awesome. Let me make you look awesome. At the end of the day,
Awesome.
I'm going to make you look awesome. And guess what? We're both going to look awesome together.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I'm so glad you brought that up because I just had a really interesting call or conversation rather with Michael, who's my CEO, and I work very, very closely with him. And I don't remember how this came up, but he said to me, well, what do you think is the biggest pain point? He came from cybersecurity. He said, what do you think is the biggest pain point that we used to experience? Because he had a company called Atata that he sold to Mimecast. And what was the biggest pain point for people that worked in cybersecurity? And I said, well, that they were worried that they would get like a virus or a threat that would take down the whole system. And he was like, you would think that. But when you actually, we built our company on that, and we realized that wasn't it at all. And when we actually asked and didn't project what we thought, the answer was exactly what you said. They were worried about losing their jobs and they wanted to look good. And that was the biggest concern that high level senior people in cybersecurity have. There's a tremendous turnover and they're worried about losing their jobs. How can you help them keep their job? How can you help them look good? And that was the pain point. And they never would have known that if they had stopped to ask. Right. But I've never heard anybody bring that up until you just brought it up.
Well, we deal with so many different people in this world, right? I'll take two very, very polarizing comparisons. You might have someone that you're negotiating with that, is retiring in 6 months, right? That person wants to retire on looking good. They're not looking for the next promotion. Their next promotion is doing something different in their lives, right? And then you have the people right out of school, and it's like they're striving for different things. Okay, you're striving for a promotion. Let me help you get there. Okay, you're going out from a retirement standpoint. You just kind of want to buy your time over the next 6 months, not ruffle any feathers. Great, I'm going to help you do that. But we deal with so many different types of people that it's, what can I do to help you to help you be awesome? What is it? Right. And that'll craft my message differently.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, right, that's a successful negotiation is one where there's a lot of collaboration. And I mean, if able to, you want to give the other person their win, right? You want to give them their speech to go back to their boss and say, look at what a good job I did. And I think a properly crafted negotiation, you can have both. You can walk away with things that are of high value to you, and they have things that are of high value to them, which we may not necessarily value things the same, right?
Yeah, we just got to ask them, just like Eliza said.
Yeah, we got to form that relationship, and we got to ask. So to wrap us up here, Eliza, we've referenced a few times, and it is PRETA, correct?
That's correct. Yep.
PRETA.
Oh,
Okay.
why didn't you correct me?
Well,
I was
because
saying,
right.
I was wondering if I had it right in my own head, so I was going to wait till the end. So I would have done the same thing, Annie. Don't worry about it. So
I
you're
apologize.
not the first person that's done that even this week. So don't feel bad. You're good. This will help you. You'll never forget it. PRET as like ready information. So the name was, we had a sales enablement platform. This is a really quick story. I know.
please. We have time.
We were originally a sales enablement platform to combine a whole bunch of tools like Zendesk and HubSpot and Outlook. And look, we're underperforming sales reps were falling off. So wherever those anomalies and all those platforms that were integrated, and where could those processes be optimized to help people perform up to par? Michael said he just retired from the Army. He didn't really feel a connection to it. It wasn't filling him. And he had these 2 life-changing experiences on a plane, or in the course of 24 hours. The second one was on a plane, like real God moments. Whole company was pivoted to looking for anomalies in biometric data to help people stay in recovery longer, and improve outcomes and the continuity of care, which is always a real dearth of that in recovery. People can tend to do well in these residential programs or when they're in recovery, and we're treating it like it's an acute disease. Oh, we patched up your broken arm, good luck. And then relapse happens, and people, because of shame and guilt and fear and stigma, are too afraid to ask for help. They don't get back to treatment. And with the lethality of drugs out there, people are dying at unprecedented rates. So company pivoted. He called all the founders, all the investors. Everyone was either said nothing or was very much on board. He called the development team, which he's worked with for many years. And there was just this silence. And he was so confused, because of anybody, the developers should be like, okay, like whatever, like we'll pivot, cool, like no problem. And after a silence, Michael said, like, what's going on here? Why is there this long pause? Are you not on board with this? And Prabhash, who's the chief engineer, said, no, I'm just, what? And you're keeping the name PRETA, right? Michael said, yeah. And he said, oh, okay, because PRETA is they're from Calcutta. PRETA is the Hindu word for hungry ghosts, the ghosts of addiction, the ghosts of unquenchable thirst, unmet hunger, insatiable hunger, their craving. It's where the book In the Realm of the Hungry Ghosts about addiction, very famous book. That's where that comes from, PRETA. And we didn't know that. So the company was named that far before we pivoted into the SUD space. So it's like this another crazy God moment. So you'll never forget the name, but it started French, PRET, ready information. And we essentially we're a software tool. We integrate with modern, non-stigmatizing wearables, Fitbit, Garmin, Apple. We have a strategic partnership with Google Fitbit. And as I mentioned, our mission is to save lives by providing the right intervention at the right time. Right now in treatment, I mentioned 85% relapse rate in the first year. Many people are falling off because we are treating this like it's an acute problem. Like people with addiction can be fixed and sent on their way when it is a chronic and progressive disease. So by providing people with off-the-shelf wearables, we take that information. We're a behavioral analytics company. And what we're doing is we're baselining normal for people and looking for anomalies. Where are those people beginning to show early signs of relapse? There's a well-known ideology in recovery that the relapse happens before the relapse, and it absolutely does. But to ask the individual to identify when they're becoming physiologically dysregulated and then do something about it when they're already struggling is an impossible ask. So we don't ask people to do any of that. They just have to wear the watch. And we take the information and we report back to their treatment center that they left and anybody in their support network, so that those individuals can step in and course correct. And so a slip doesn't become a fall. There's also a lack of really robust outcome measurements. So these programs are, if we had an 85% failure rate essentially for cancer treatment, people would be screaming, like absolutely screaming over this. And that isn't, but because it's SUD and it's a stigmatized field and these people have been treated as the other for so long, we accept that. So it's critical to have treatment centers be able to track their outcomes so that they're then held accountable for those outcomes. And thankfully, accreditation programs and insurance payers are beginning to hold programs accountable for outcomes. And what better way to track outcomes than put a device on somebody? They don't have to do anything but wear it. And we can actually see how that program performs over time.
Wow.
That's awesome.
That's actually truly, genuinely fascinating. And so these people who are using your program, they have an off-the-shelf wearable, like you said, right? Fitbit, iWatch, or whatever the heck they're called nowadays. I can't keep track. But one of those off-the-shelf things, they implement your software into it that has an algorithm, if you will, of physiological data points that will kind of calculate when, for lack of a better term, something's not right. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe an analogy here, a crude one. This is me speaking. This is not Eliza on behalf of Preta. but in the same way, a therapy dog starts to notify when someone's about to have a seizure, right? Like a preemptive notification.
That's a great analogy. I wasn't sure what you were going to say. That's a good one.
I charge by the hour for my analogies, by the way. So I'll take some royalties for that. But okay, so anyway, that's really, so it's like an indicator of where something's not right. We need to take some kind of course correct here to change this direction.
That's right. And we are not diagnostic. We don't want to be diagnostic. We don't, because then people won't wear it. If we're definitively able to say, like, this person used crystal meth or this person used hair, like, we don't want to do that. What we want to say is, this person is really dysregulated. They look like they're struggling. They need help. Because that's when people respond. When you reach out with empathy, when you reach out with curiosity, hey, I noticed you're sleeping like crap. Tell me what's going on there. How can we help you? We have found with our earliest customers that has been a complete game changer in their outreach. So instead of, right now, treatment centers tend to reach out 7 days, 14 days, 30, 60, 90, 6 months, 12 months. And sometimes people answer, sometimes they don't. It's hard to get people to answer. You get 50% on like a good week. And half the time those answers, they know that they're not being honest and transparent. And that's because of the way that society has viewed SUD for so long. And so we can actually relatively definitively say, like, this person is struggling. And then even more, we use all these clinically validated assessment tools that are accepted by payers and by accrediting organizations to marry up what they are reporting versus what their body's saying they're feeling, which is massively interesting too. And being able to then give kind of an overall recovery score of how somebody's doing and what their likelihood is of being able to stay successful in recovery.
Well, to wrap us up here, Annie, I can see in your eyes that you have some thoughts on that. So I'm going to let you go for a minute on some of the things that Eliza just said.
No, I think it's fascinating. You know, I think what you're doing and the work that you're doing is innovative, but not disruptive, right? To that physical person. And you're using existing outreach people, whether it's the center that they were just at, to reach out and follow up in a more empathetic way. I think it's fascinating, as opposed to, put a Band-Aid on them, kick it out the door, and don't be surprised if they show up again, right? It's how can we help people and be proactive as opposed to reactive. So
we want to get people back to those same centers so they're not bouncing around. I mean, I went to 9 different centers, 9. Not the same one I only went to twice. And it happened to be because they serendipitously called me about a week before it was ready. That doesn't happen. So we want them to go back to the same centers. And so the centers that's who we sell into. We sell into the treatment centers and when we're working with clients.
No,
I just wanted to say, just continue to crush it. Sounds like you're doing amazing things, helping the people that are very vulnerable. So just keep doing it.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty amazing. And, a lot of times when I'm a pretty critical thinker about like new products or whatnot. Anytime I hear of anything new, I analyze it and I can think about, even if it's good, I'm usually like, okay, but what about this downside? Like, honestly, when I think about your product, my first thought is like, why wouldn't everybody just do this? Right? Like this seems like such an obvious ask to me. So I love what you're talking about. I think it sounds like a complete game changer if enough people are for even one individual, but imagine what could happen if you had a society flooded with people who are all using your program. I mean, it wouldn't, it would make a substantial difference. Yeah. Unbelievable.
Relapse rates would plummet. That's for sure. And then programs, like you would know where those where the best programs are, where programs are beginning to, like, where drop off is happening, where can they optimize outreach, where can they streamline. So instead of just calling at these random intervals, they're able to reach out to people when they need it, so that hopefully those relapses are prevented in the first place. The implications are massive. And then there's implications for suicidality, depression and anxiety. All sorts of different facets. So we're really excited.
Right.
We've got a good thing going.
It sounds like it 100%. Well, everybody, thanks for listening today. This was Annie Hoffman and Eliza Foltz. Annie with the Maker Group, Eliza with Preta. And this is Matt Despins, and we'll see you guys next time. Thanks so much.